we are taught to be knowers. We are taught to have answers. From elementary school, we raise our hand. I have the answer, and we get a gold star. We get into business. We're rewarded for being the smartest person in the room. I've worked with doctors who are brilliant doctors, but then they get to head up a department and they haven't a clue what they're doing, but they still think they know it all. So this idea of being the knower and the know-it-all is a really arrogant stance that I think people adopt unconsciously.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Chuck Wisner, who's going to chat about the power of great conversations. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. What if the real conversation that's shaping your life is the one that you're not even aware of having? We're not talking about small talk or corporate communication. We're talking about unconscious stories that run your marriage, your business, your inner peace, all without your permission. Our guest is Chuck Wisner. He is a leadership advisor who has worked with companies like Google, Apple, and top-tier CEOs. But what makes his perspective different is this. He doesn't just teach communication, he reveals how our words and emotions beneath them build or break every part of life in what we say and what we want. He's author of the book, The Art of Conscious Conversation. And in this episode, we're going to explore why so many high performers feel disconnected, even when they're surrounded by great people. We'll talk about the spiral of emotions and how to listen without fixing, and how to rewrite the stories that keep us stuck. This is the hard work. And if you've ever found yourself in a moment where you just didn't know what needed to be said, or you reacted in a way you regret, this episode will shift how you show up. Let's meet Chuck and see how it's done. Welcome to Richer Soul, Chuck Wisner. It's great to have you join us today.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And I'm excited to learn from you today. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Whoa. Growing up, that's a story. My family didn't teach me much about money, except that I didn't have much. We didn't have much. And so I think the lessons I learned, my father worked multiple jobs to keep 5 kids, eating and living and going to school. But my mother was pretty insistent when she wanted something to happen for us kids. And so for an example, she would when I was 6, I was always sitting around the house and in school tapping my fingers and drumming and stuff. And she went to the band director and said, "You got to give him drum lessons." And he said, "He's too young." And she said, "No, you got to give him drum lessons." And then literally that was the beginning of my first career, which was as a percussionist. But she scraped and saved so that I could have those drum lessons. But we were a fairly, lower middle class family, money in, money out. I had a job early on when I was 12 in a drugstore doing shelves, and then a warehouse, and then one thing led to another. And then I ended up being a musician and playing professionally in clubs and things like that, and recording and stuff like that, and teaching. And so early on, I was actually learning how to make my own money even before I was out of the house. So, and then I'd say I think I had just an innate interest in it, because as I got older, what my dad didn't teach me, I had a pretty heavy curiosity about. So I just kept teaching myself, you know.
Was there something that drove that curiosity, or was it just kind of naturally inbred? Or
Well, it might have been, I had some really good friends in high school that were the sons and daughters of wealthy families. And so they were my friends, and I would go to their oceanside front house or their riverfront house, and think, whoa, this is the other life. So I did get to taste that. And so I think, it wasn't like I didn't know that, money doesn't solve the world's problems, but it does make you more comfortable.
that it does. So you had experience and you got to see how others lived. And so that sometimes creates the motivation. You're not stuck with the mindset of, well, maybe that's a question though, is it didn't sound like you had a mindset of being stuck in that poverty place, that, or there were things, or maybe there were things that your parents told you or that society told you that held you back.
No, I think it was more like, honestly, I haven't ever talked about this, but I think it was more like I was jealous of those families. I was like, hey, how comes they have this and I don't? So that might have sparked I want some of that.
Sounds like the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book, right?
Yeah.
I see they have this money. I want to learn how they did it.
How do I do that?
Hey, that
Yeah.
works.
Yeah. I read that book and I sent it to my kids when they were young. So I don't know if they ever read it.
So, how did the life of being a musician work out?
Well, it was actually pretty successful. I was pretty talented, and what it did for me, besides my family being poor, there was a fair amount of dysfunction. I had three sisters and a younger brother, and what music did was it was my escape. I escaped out of the house and the family, and spent a lot of time playing music in high school, even, and then in a rock and roll band, and then symphony, and professionally. So yeah, so I think it was like a way of finding a way in the world that actually I experienced the success, I experienced the rewards, and that was really different than what was going on in my family life.
You're not a musician. Well, you're not a professional musician today. That's not
Right.
what you
That's
wrote
right.
your
Yeah,
book about. So,
that's
what
right. No,
shifted? What changed?
well, I was graduating from high school and having this. At that point, I had a professional career because I had cut records and I was teaching and playing, but I had really bad counseling, and I didn't go to college right out of high school because I just, my role models were band directors and say, oh, just go to Penn State University and get a music degree and you can be a band director. Well, that was the last thing I wanted to do because I was already way beyond that. So I was confused and I didn't go to college. And that very year, that first year when I wasn't in college and my friends were, was the first year of the Vietnam draft. And so that was a scary event. And I remember they had a bin on TV and they were pulling dates out of the bin. And literally the first one they pulled out was number one. And then they kept going until they got to 365. And if you got anything under 200, you were sort of not in good shape. I pulled number 111, and that was like, whoa, I got to do something. Well, some of my musician friends who I had played big bands with, older than me, said, hey, I'm in this Air Force National Guard band. Why don't you audition for the band? And I did. And I got in. And there's another long story because I couldn't go to basic training for Air Force. I had to go to Army basic training. But in the long run, I ended up playing 7 years in a National Guard band. And during that time, during those years, early years, I had an art teacher that I really loved, and we were great, became friends. She saw my artistic talent, and she said, "Have you ever thought about architecture?" And I thought about, no, but I looked into it and it sounded really intriguing. It's a fascinating profession. And I went and worked for a firm as a blueprint copier and a gopher. And I got to know people there and learned how to draft. And 4 years later, I left my hometown in Pennsylvania and went to Boston to go to architecture school. And that was the transition from music.
Interesting. So now you became an architect, or you're
Yeah.
studying to be an architect. The book's not about architecture, nor is that where you ended up in your career. So another
there's connections
shift
there, though. There's connections. Yeah, another shift. Yeah. 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 And so, like architecture, I wasn't rejecting music. I was just fell in love with architecture. And then years later, I practiced in architecture in Boston for 20 years. One of my partners was an alcoholic. And when we were 6 guys sitting around doing stuff, it was not a problem, but we became a larger firm. He was a problem for our staff and our clients. So we hired in some help, and we burned through 2 useless consultants. And then a woman came in. Her name is Linda Reed. God bless her. She's still a good buddy of mine. She came in and she met with us individually. She met with us as a group. And in a matter of 3 or 4 months, she got us through to the end. We're all sort of agreeing on how to resolve these problems and come out the other end. And I've always had a spiritual and philosophical interest. And what she did just sort of struck that chord. I was like, how did she do that? How did she know what questions to ask? How did she know, how to get us to talk to one another? And so I became really curious about her world. And I studied, I actually got to work with her a little bit around mediation in the building industry. But then I started studying, and I did mediation through the Harvard Law School. And I did a body mind therapy certification. I was just like testing the waters. And I ended up studying something called the ontology of language, which is what Linda studied and had great teachers. And I was just taken by it. I didn't reject architecture. I just fell in love with something new. And I wasn't afraid to sort of like jump and try it out. So 4 years after retooling myself, I left my architecture partnership, and I had one client in my back pocket for $100 a week and 2 young kids and scared to death. But that was how I transitioned to what I do now.
So what exactly do you do now?
So for the last 30 years or so, I've been a very confidential advisor to senior executives in Fortune 200 companies, working with them individually and working with their teams. Individually, leadership style, leadership communication, getting to smack bad leaders around a little bit, tell them to stop what they're doing. And then with teams, getting them to find more alignment and more ways to collaborate and create together.
Out of curiosity, over the last 30 years, getting better, getting worse, or not changing?
Oh, you mean what I'm doing?
Communication.
Oh, not changing. I see reoccurring patterns all the time. And it's astounding to me because what I'm teaching and doing isn't rocket science, but it takes courage, takes humility, and it takes practice to want to change.
What are those recurring patterns you notice?
We are taught to be knowers. We are taught to have answers. From elementary school, we raise our hand. I have the answer, and we get a gold star. We get into business. We're rewarded for being the smartest person in the room. I've worked with doctors who are brilliant doctors, but then they get to head up a department and they haven't a clue what they're doing. But they still think they know it all. So this idea of being the knower and the know-it-all is a really arrogant stance that I think people adopt unconsciously. And I'm not judging in that sense, because it's just sort of how culture sort of indoctrinates us and business indoctrinates us. So that's one pattern. And the other pattern is, which really led me to the book, is people not knowing how conversations work. I mean, really the fundamentals of how conversations work. And so I see the other pattern is I see teams that rather than collaborating, they're just each telling their perspectives and going around a table and revisiting things. And then the loudest person or the person in the room with the most stripes says, okay, what are we going to do? Let's make a decision. So the quality of the conversations are really not as rich as they should be.
I'm going to ask you about that in a minute, but let's get to the book. So what inspired you to write the book, The Art of Conscious Conversation, Transforming How We Talk, Listen, and Interact?
The seed of this happened. I had a client whose name was Jamie Bonini, and he was a client of mine at Chrysler many years ago. And then he became a big wig at Toyota, and he's a great guy. Anyway, I worked with him for 5 or 6 years, and he was a great student. I mean, he was just like insatiably curious about getting better. You know, we covered a lot of material, emotional intelligence, meditation, and all these conversational tools, advocacy and inquiry, and all these things. And we were having cocktails one time. This was in Detroit. And he said to me, you know, I love all of this, and it really has changed me as a human being, but I don't know how to connect the dots. You know, there's this, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this. And I have trouble connecting all the dots. And that really struck a chord, because even my studies in language, you know, come from some very tough to read linguists like Searle and Austin. And then there's Peter Senge's book, and then there's spiritual books, and there's meditation books, and emotional intelligence books. And so I sat on that for a while. How do you connect the dots? And I think one day I was walking on the beach with my wife, and the idea popped in my head. When I studied language, I realized that there were 4 types of conversations that could be the glue and the structure to connect the dots that Jamie was looking for. And that's really sparked a curiosity for me.
I was going to ask you, how do conversations work? But then you talked about the 4 types of conversations. Do those go together, or are they separate?
Those 2 questions?
Yeah. Or are they separate
Yes.
questions?
No, they go together, because really what the 4 conversations are, it's like saying, if we just think about ourselves in conversation, like fish in water, we're in conversation, but not really aware of what we're in, the waters we're swimming in.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so how they work means that question goes with the 4 conversations, because what the 4 conversations are is just breaking down conversations into 4 types, so that we have a new lens and a new eye and a new window into understanding how they work and why they don't work.
So let's go over, what are the 4 types of conversations?
So they're, very briefly, they're storytelling conversations, collaborative conversations. Storytelling is personal. We all come to every encounter we have with our stories. There's a whole lot of depth there because of how our brains work and our history. Collaborative conversations are that when we're now in conversation together, you and I are in a conversation. And then creative conversations are about our intuition, our ability to appreciate the right side of our brain, our creative side, to wonder, to imagine possibilities. And then the last conversation, which we live in and day out unconsciously, is the commitment conversation, which is the action conversation. That is how we coordinate action with other people. Everything from who's going to take out the trash to who's making the decision on the strategy for the next quarter in a boardroom. So the commitment conversation is something we love to do, because it's how we make promises, how we decide who's going to do what by when. But we don't really understand that conversation, so we sort of do it blindly.
I was going to say, people love stories. They're always hooked in. So not everyone can tell a great story. I'm working on it, but I know that's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand collaborative, but again, you have to be in the mindset to be collaborative.
Mm-hmm.
Creative is I think, a struggle, because people feel judged, or people don't just allow the creativity to happen before they start breaking it down. In other words, that'll never work. Yeah, judging it. Perfect. Right. But the commitment one, you said people don't do that well. And I'm guessing that You said one thing and I heard another.
That's possible.
Or where is the issue in that commitment conversation?
Well, it's an incredibly important conversation because it determines our tomorrow. So every promise you make, whether it's with your family or your friends or your colleagues or your boss, every commitment conversation you have, every promise you make determines what you do tomorrow or what people do for you and how you coordinate action. So it has an incredible sort of impact, consequence on how life unfolds. And there's only, it's a very simple diagram of how it works, but yet we don't do it well. Because when I make a request to you, to ask you to do something or to help me or give me information, you only have three options, but we're addicted to one option. And that one option is yes, sure, no problem. I can take care of that. And as if with that addiction, say a boss runs by Freddie's desk and says, hey, can you get me slides for Monday morning's presentation? And Freddie says, sure, no problem. He works the weekend getting a presentation ready and he gives it to his boss, let's call her Bonnie, on Monday morning. She takes it to her, she opens it up in her computer and looks at it and goes, oh, this is a mess. This isn't what I wanted. Not enough graphics, not enough pictures, not the right message. And I tell that story because she then is angry. He's disappointed. She doesn't trust him and won't ask him to do something again, perhaps. And that was just a sloppy conversation. A sloppy promise, right? There's an antidote to that, which is every request is made of 4 or 5 parts. And if Freddie would have just said, okay, I'd love to help you, but help me understand who's it for, who's going to be in the meeting, what are you trying to accomplish? Do you want bullet points? Do you want pictures? What format do you want? And what would success look like? If he asked a few questions, not to be a smartass, to help her by making sure he can fulfill the promise in a satisfying way. So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I said that makes a lot of sense. And I'm guessing most people don't clarify, or they've created their own idea of what the deliverable is.
Exactly. And that's part of our storytelling brain. We hear, can you do a presentation? My brain or Freddie's brain is already going, oh, yeah, exactly. I can see it in my head. I can see the pictures. I can see all that. Sure, no problem. Right. But you missed that clarification piece that you mentioned. Right. And the other thing is that's a yes problem. That's an addicted to yes problem. The other problem is we're afraid of no, and no always has to be no should be in our vocabulary. I had a teacher, Rafael Echeverria, who told us a request without a possible no isn't a request.
It's a demand.
It's a demand.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't need to say a lot about no, except it should be part of our vocabulary. Sometimes just for boundaries, just to say, no, I can't do that, whatever. But they also can turn into a counteroffer, which is our third and best option, which is to say, of the 4 parts of the promise that you're asking me, I can deliver 1, 2, and 3. But the 4th one, I can't get it to you by Monday, but I can get it Monday morning, but I can have it to you by Monday afternoon. And that's the counteroffer.
I understand that. I think what happens in most corporate is they already have a full plate and now another demand comes along. And I teach people, okay, this is what's on my plate currently. If you'd like to add this, what do you want to remove?
Yes, exactly.
And so What are we taking away? Because you just can't keep working more and more and more.
Yeah, and that's a gentle no. That's really a counteroffer. I'm happy to do it, but help me take something off my plate, right?
And I don't think people do that enough.
No, because well, we're talking about corporations and hierarchies. There's the fear of saying no to the boss. There's the fear of being accused of not being a team player, not doing enough work. But in fact, what it ends up being was bad promises, bad results. And that is the root of how distrust comes about.
This episode of Richer Soul is sponsored by the Profit Answer Man podcast. If you're a business owner who wants to scale and grow, increase profits, or want to have strategic conversations around your financials, then check out the podcast. You'll learn how to work less, increase cash flow, increase profits, and build reserves to help you weather storms. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. That makes sense. So let's take a step back. We talked about stories, but we didn't talk about the real stories, the stories we tell ourselves,
Yes.
right? That voice in your head that's probably worse than the boss talking about stories. And you bring that up in the book, which was kind of surprising that you went there, only because that's, it's wider than just a conversational kind of book. But at the end of the day, that's what's driving the answers, isn't it? Because when the boss comes to you, it's our stories, true or not, that are making our responses go out. So I'd love for you to touch on that and what you found.
Yeah. So, interesting comment that it's deeper than a conversation, because here I think about these are the conversations we're having with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've done the exercise in the book, the public-private conversation exercise, with hundreds of people, and literally have to write down a conversation as though it was recorded. And then on the other side of the paper, they write down what they were thinking and feeling while both parties were talking, while I was talking and while the other was talking. And when people do that exercise, 5 minutes, 7-minute exercise, we stop, the room is quiet. So what did you find out? And they were all like, I'm surprised. What did you discover? Swear words, negativity, judgment. What a jerk. Right? And so that chatter, that sort of like noise, or, in the meditation world, they're called monkeys of the mind. That chatter is very distracting. And the funny thing is, most people don't have full consciousness of it. It's just running in the background. But like you said, it creates your emotional reaction. And then that in turn creates your response, whether it's out of fear or worry or disappointment or whatever it is. Your emotional response plays into the words that you can or can't speak.
And if you don't know what that trigger is, you might say things that might be out of context for the situation. That's why, like, going back to the question I asked you at the beginning of the interview was, tell me about how you grew up and how you learned about money. And I asked that because if you don't know your money scripts,
right,
I can hear money conversations. I can hear how people think about money just in the way they speak, but they're not even aware of it.
Right. That's right. It's there so that we have background stories that we didn't consciously choose. They come from our experience, our culture, our family, our friends, our circles. And so we adopt stories that, stories aren't a bad thing. Some of them are great. Some of them keep us alive, and some of us help us thrive and have goals. But some of them are not helpful. And the ones that aren't helpful, whether it's about money or whether it's about, your fear of speaking up to the boss, or whether it's you're not smart enough or you're not rich enough or you're not whatever enough, those are not helpful. They're harmful. And so what I encourage people is to investigate your story that is holding you back. Investigate your story that is keeping you from being true to yourself, but also more effective and productive in the world and happy.
And these uninvestigated stories and judgments, I guess they drive ego. And you had a quote in the book that also said a basic premise of Buddhism is that are unexamined desires of the root of all human suffering.
Right.
And so if we don't take the time to do this work, it's probably why we're suffering when everything is good.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. And so I like to think of our stories that don't serve us well and our communication patterns that don't go well. I really think of them as patterns because it's a little less judgmental to think about a pattern that I have that I didn't consciously choose. I adopted that pattern because of some experience in my life or some teacher or some parent, right? And so if I can look at it as a pattern, I can detach a little bit, and then I have some space to investigate that pattern. And one of the first things to ask is, when that's happening, what's the underlying desire that is driving my private conversation or my judgments? What are my standards? Are there power issues involved? What am I concerned about? Those are the four fundamental questions that help us. I guess the word might be deconstruct harmful thinking.
Yes. And I think a lot of this, because there was a kind of theme in there. When it comes to speaking, most people are thinking, oh, I just need a better speech. But yet it starts way before the actual words, right? There's things that we need to unlearn and to investigate before we even begin that part. Can you kind of explain that?
Yeah, so an example would be someone who is, I can think of a couple examples, someone who is really insecure about their, I don't say public speaking, but just speaking in a meeting, and they're just not really secure, right? Well, that's a story they have in their head. I can't do this, right? And if they don't investigate that story, if they don't bust that story, they'll never change that pattern of discomfort and stress around speaking. And so the investigation is to really go in and say, wait a minute, is it true? What do I have any facts to back this up? Maybe I was scared when I was young, or maybe I got punished when I spoke up when I shouldn't have, or something. And whatever, are there facts? And what standards am I holding myself to? And what power issues are there? I'm diminishing my power to say my words don't count, and giving everyone else power. So this notion of asking these questions is the way to deconstruct. And in the book, I talk about, I grew up with a story that I wasn't man enough from my grandfather. Well, that story lived with me a long, long time till I was studying language. And even with my successes, I always had this nagging thing. Oh, you're not man enough. You're not big enough. You're not as manly. You're not as smart. That always was in the background unconsciously until I busted that story. And then, wait a minute, that was my grandfather's standard of what a man is. Doesn't have to be mine. That was me giving my grandfather's voice a lot of power because I was a little boy and I didn't know any better. It's like, he's the adult. He must be right. Right. And so that's just another example of how you can, push in and investigate and bust up some things that aren't serving you well.
And I think that's why today in the workplace, a lot of young people struggle with boomers, is because as I reading your book, I'm like, oh yeah, that's the way life used to be. That's the way we were told to behave.
Right.
And these are the norms of that time that have changed since then. Dramatically. But if they were ingrained to us as a kid and we never challenged them, then they're still running in the background, which is kind of where we started the conversation earlier. They're there and those patterns are running. And you mentioned, the people being afraid to speak. I mean, it's the number one fear beyond anything is public speaking. Have you ever figured out why? Is there like a root cause of that, or?
That gets into the question of what is fear, So, when we have a trigger and we get stressed, whether it's speaking or doing something else, what's driving that is fear. And we spin down out of that fear, like, oh, they'll think, and I think it's the stories inside. They won't like what I say. I might look stupid. I might, I might flub, I might say the wrong thing. All of that background noise keeps us from being present in the moment, right? And I think, I don't know, I certainly don't have enough research to say what the root cause is, which is your question. But if you think about the fears, right, we are from an early age programmed to have the answer, programmed to be able to answer with our raised hand, and programmed in business to be the smartest one in the room. So what's the companion of that is, what if I fail? What if I don't have the answer? And my antidote that we always teach is, well, let's shift from being the knowers to the learner. And if I'm giving a talk or doing something, I'm there just as much to learn from the people that I'm working with as I am to tell them what my truth is, or tell them, whatever my expertise is. So learning creates that another level of comfort to say, I don't have all the answers. I'm not giving up my expertise, but I don't have all the answers. And that's a shift, because it takes humility and it takes some vulnerability.
And if you were a kid in school, whether or not you raised your hand, if you had the wrong answer, what happened? Everyone laughed at you.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that becomes a root. Gosh, you don't want to be embarrassed again. So then maybe in school, you even stop speaking. So I'm not going to raise my hand because I might get it wrong and everyone will laugh at me.
And
So these are deep, old patterns that we get into. And again, I love calling them patterns, because rather than judging ourselves and beating ourselves up, we can go, wow, that pattern is really not serving me well. Let me work it. Let me change it. Let me shift it over.
You're taking the emotion out of it. I mean, literally, that's what you're doing, right? It's a pattern, it's a programming. And again, that's why we always ask the question about money, because we understand that when you take the emotion out of it, then it becomes a solvable problem. But if you're stuck in that emotional loop, it's hijacking you without all that mental noise all the time and preventing you from doing that.
Yeah. So here's how I think about that. So emotions are real. I don't want to deny anyone's emotions, right? That's like it. Oh, so it was, I can't remember the author's name. There's a wonderful poet who said, emotions are a physical upheaval of our thinking. So something happens, the boss does something, our partner does something, the kids drive us crazy. We have this emotional reaction of anger, disappointment, whatever. But fundamentally, I can say every emotion you have, there's a story underneath. There's a story of disappointment. There's a story of I didn't get what I wanted to get. There's a story of they didn't meet my standards. There's a story under every emotion. So we don't discard the emotion, but we go, the emotion is only a physical sign that you need to do some work. You need to investigate your thinking, because it's really the thinking that is flooding you with chemicals to have the emotional reaction. And that then gives us some clarity to look at it as a pattern. And the other piece of that is sort of the Zen piece, whereas when we start looking at something non-emotionally, or we start looking at something to take it apart and understand it, we're detaching. So rather than our ego sort of attaching to our emotions, saying, you're right, you have every right to be angry, go get them, blah, 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 we can detach and go, wow, look at that. And that witnessing is where we become more aware and more wise.
It takes work to do that. That's deep inner work. And, it sounds simple, but it's learning to step back and be the observer in the situation and let go. At that point, there's probably an emotional hijack. So you get stuck in the moment and
That's
stepping out of it. Part of that, and you talk about this in the corporate world, you say that presence and intuition aren't soft skills. They're essential, especially for the logical leader, right? So how do we start to begin to notice and then trust these softer signals? Because in corporate, and it's like go, 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 and
go,
numbers, right?
Yeah. Well, earlier on, we were talking about stories and collaboration, creative, and commitment conversations. I coined a phrase called the conversational bypass, which means we love our stories and we love taking action. So we love telling our stories. We go to meetings, everyone tells a story, and then someone says, okay, what are we going to do? Let's make a decision. So the conversational bypass says, great, you took the two conversations you love and you're addicted to, and you bypassed the two that are the hardest and the juiciest and the most opportunity to learn from each other and the most opportunity to generate possibilities. And so the creative conversation is not only about our intuition, it's about giving ourselves permission to think outside the box, to dream, to wonder what else is possible. And sometimes I get the response, we don't have time for that. And so my response is, how many decisions have you made quickly that you had to rescind, that you had to say, oh gosh, we didn't have enough information, or we missed this other idea that was a better solution because we didn't take the time to explore.
Or you were Blockbuster and you ignored Netflix and your business went away. Or you were Kodak and you ignored digital photography and your business went away.
Because you were just focused on your thing and you couldn't. It reminds me a little bit about quantum physics. You know, we have all this potentiality exists out in the universe, and depends on what we look at is what we see. But in the world of possibilities, in the world of creative conversation, if you're hell bent on going in a direction, like we're going to stick with our guns, whether it's, Netflix or somebody else, if we're going to stick with our guns, we cannot think outside of other possibilities. Even if we see them, we don't accept them because we're in lockdown mode of no, this is the right way. It's a little bit more like being a knower. Like I have the answer. Those guys are off the rails. They don't know what the hell they're doing.
So how do you break that?
Well, I say to people and leaders and teams and not just in corporations, at home, with kids, with family, take the time to really have the collaborative conversation, which is really about honoring multiple perspectives, listening to multiple perspectives and absorbing them and asking the questions. Like the collaborative conversation, I say a bad conversation is two fists coming together. It should be this way. And I say this and you say this and we're like this and meetings are like this and there's 10 fists going and, oh, no. And then we go, okay, well, what are we going to do? So I say with the 4 questions, I'm willing to go, I have a position, but I'm going to tell you my thinking under my position. Here are my concerns. Here are my standards. Here's what I think good would look like. Authority, it's not my decision, but I'm voicing my opinion. And my desire is that, we get this job done in 2 weeks or we have the right strategy for the next 6 months. So I open my hand, and now if the other person can open their hand, we can be in a collaborative conversation, which is a mutual learning conversation. I learn from you, you learn from me. And guess what? That automatically, if we do that together, automatically ideas start coming because we're in this open conversation, open mind, open heart. And an idea will bubble up and say, oh, you just made me think of it in a new way. Maybe we could do X, right? That is a hint of a creative conversation. That is a taste of a creative conversation.
It almost sounds like that one where you plant the seed of what to do in the other person and then you let it be their idea and then they love it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you have the patience to do that. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. So on the creative conversation, which I think was your question, how do you do it? I think there's a personal side to that. And there's a relational side to that. The personal side is investigating how stuck you are in your linear, rational left brain. If your whole life is that and you don't have a creative outlet, even if it's gardening, even if it's just reading a poem, even if it's just going for a walk, if you don't have a creative outlet that you can appreciate the sunshine, the sunset and the water and whatever, if you don't have that creative outlet, then you're not really balancing your creative side with your linear rational side. And so purposefully do that. Read a book, learn something you never knew before, do something that you think is a little kooky. I actually go in my garden, and one of my favorite things is to go in my garden without a plan. And just let it happen. Just be in the moment and let it unfold. Something will talk to me, something needs weeding, something needs cutting, watering, whatever. So the creative side takes that individual sort of effort, but then on the interpersonal relational piece, we have to give each other permission to wonder about possibilities without shutting each other down. And that's why brainstorming often doesn't work, because we say, oh, let's brainstorm. And somebody says something, next person goes, well, what about this? And then someone in the room says, oh, we tried that 2 years ago. It'll never work. Boom, the conversation is dead because everyone's afraid to speak up. So the creative conversation has to be this free, open, no idea is stupid, no question is stupid. And just do it for 10 minutes and experiment. It doesn't matter if you come with 10 stupid ideas, some spark might come out of that.
You've worked with a lot of big corporations and a lot of corporate leaders. What is the biggest issue that you tend to see underlying the communication problem?
Egos, hierarchical, sort of really unconscious hierarchical pressure. I've worked with plenty that say, oh, no, we listen, we do. But yet in practice, they're very hierarchical. And then a lack of leadership in saying, let's vet these problems. Let's take the time to think through things before we make decisions. Let's vet the possibilities. But ego and the hierarchies, power issues are true no matter whether it's with your kids or your boss, because we talk to different people in different ways. We give different people's voices different power, different authority, right? And so all those things play into it, and that is exasperated in corporate settings, in hierarchical settings.
So how do you break that up? How do you get change to occur?
Well, so, I've worked with leaders that don't want to do the work because, as you said earlier, it's hard work. I'm who I am. I'm not going to change it. I've been this way. I've been successful for 20 years. I'm not going to change it. And meanwhile, they have an unhappy team, but they're not. So I don't waste my time with those folks. It's like, good luck, bud, or good luck, gal. But the leaders that really, like I was mentioning, Jamie, the leaders that really get the message that there's investigation to do, there's self-work to do, to be a better listener, to be a better leader, to be a better communicator. Those are the people that really then, because they've done their work, they can bring their team along.
You made a comment that I hear a lot of people say, which is kind of the self-development part is hard work.
Mm-hmm.
Why does everyone think it's hard work?
Well, because it takes courage to look at your own crap.
Does it? Okay.
Maybe not for you, maybe not. I mean, maybe not for me, but it does. Because it's like you start looking at your private conversation, you start looking at your judgments, you start looking at how your negativity. It can be frightening. It's like, oh God, I didn't realize that I was that negative, or I was that harmful, I was that sort of ugly to that. What I think about that person. Of course, you never say it out loud, and that's the problem. That gap between the private conversation and the public conversation is where our stress comes from, because we're not really being honest about what we're thinking and feeling. So I think it takes courage. Look, the funny thing is, I think initially it takes courage, but once you start down the road, it's like freeing, because all of a sudden you don't have to have the answers. All of a sudden you can say, wow, I don't know. Help me out here. Help me understand that. Let you be the expert. I can't be the expert in everything. Or, whatever it is. But ultimately it's a little freeing, because we're not so egotistically trying to be the brightest or the best or the smartest in the room. So it's scary at first. It takes courage, but when you taste it, it's pretty hard to back away from.
Maybe that's it. Maybe I've just tasted it. So maybe I forgot how courageous it was to look at it to begin with.
To begin with.
And to begin with. Yeah. Or maybe it's just the way I'm wired. Because so going back to your thing, nobody wants to be wrong. And so in my wiring, if I don't want to be wrong, I have to constantly challenge my operating system.
Right.
In order to not be wrong. So I think I just naturally do that because that's logical, but that's me. Other people might look at it differently. It's funny though, even when my kids were in school, I remember the one time, these days especially, teachers are not giving kids feedback. Like when we grew up, if it was wrong, there was a big red X on it, right? Today we can't use red X's.
Right.
But yet kids are begging for red X's.
Right.
Because
boundaries.
They want to know where the boundaries are and how to improve. Otherwise, they're asleep.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, sleep at the wheel. I agree. And just you reminded me of something I bark about or write about a lot in the book is like, without understanding how conversations work, we are often on autopilot. We're just playing, our pattern is playing out. And then we wonder why we keep having the same trigger. We wonder why we have the same emotional reaction because we're not doing the work. We're not really looking deeply at what is the thinking under my emotion. And so autopilot doesn't do us any good. It just keeps us in that uncomfortable pattern.
And I've noticed you have done a lot of inner work yourself. And you mention it a little bit in the book. Has there been something that was more profound for you or life-changing, or has it just been the constant, trying different things and at the right time, the right thing happens and it all kind of works together?
Yeah, well, certainly the study of language and what's called in that world master stories, that study of what are your master stories that aren't serving you well, we had to write about and we had to talk about. That was life-changing because that what I discovered was why I'm not a schizophrenic would be a good title for this piece. Because I had a grandmother who worshiped the ground I walked on my mother's side. I could do no wrong. I was like, just the sweetest, loveliest little boy. And on my father's side, my step-grandfather, who was the redneck, was the one that always told me I wasn't man enough. And so I had these two competing stories. Thank God I was able to bust the negative ones. And the positive one serves me really well. I don't have to bust that.
Well, does it? Or does that then create ego?
Yes. Yeah. I'd say if I lived the way my grandmother portrayed me, I would be probably a narcissist. We all have enough experience with that. So, but yeah, you're right. That's right. But it was interesting when I was doing the work to discover that there were these two different sort of stories playing out. Yeah. Maybe I found the middle ground.
And that it always is, because a lot of times what we see with kids growing up is one parent is one way with money and the other parent is the opposite. And they get to see both parts and they start to pick if they think about it, they pick the best of both parts. Like, I can see the value of this, but I can see the value of that part of it too.
Right.
And they create their own path. But again, that takes, I always ask it because I'm always intrigued. A lot of people don't change their pattern. The fact that they made it on this show, more often than not, either they were one of the lucky ones that got it right, from their upbringing, or somewhere along the way, they learned something and they changed their patterns. They made a choice and they made an impact.
Right.
And so
they made a mistake and learned their lesson.
And they learned their lesson. They didn't keep making the same mistake. Whereas I think I probably forget the amount of people who don't learn their lesson and are stuck on repeat. People have 20 years of experience, and a lot of people go, no, you have 1 year of experience repeated 20 times. Same concept, right?
Same, playing the same record over and over and over again. Yes.
And nothing gets changed. Yeah. That's
spinning. Yeah.
Interesting how that happens. Is there anything we should have talked about that we didn't get a chance to touch on?
No, this was a good conversation. We sort of touched on everything generally, and each conversation has a much deeper, more depth look, in the book. But no, I think I hope that, since your audience is probably interested in money and finances, I hope we connect some dots there so it's not totally disconnected.
It's not. My audience has made their money, and now they're trying to figure out, why am I still not perfect? That's because of this, right? We haven't changed the stories. You got the money. You thought that was going to fix it. Yeah. No,
relax. Yeah, well, and a lot of those people, I think I used to joke about writing a book called What's Enough? Because at some point we all suffer from, we have a good life, we have, but we need that next thing to make us happy. And that's just a trap.
It is very much. And that is a question I ask a lot of people who are successful. I'm like, well, how much is enough? Because and most people cannot answer that question.
Right.
And they really struggle with it. And it's like, you have enough. Just stop, because
Enjoy. Yeah.
no matter what, you'll just keep moving the goalpost. I know I did. It's what we do as humans. We keep moving the goalpost.
Or it's the keeping up with the Joneses phenomena. Again, that takes awareness, that takes courage to look at, but it's a big problem. You know, I'm not a super wealthy man, but I'm comfortable. We have a good life. We take good vacations. We drink good wine. We eat good food. We have fun in life. You know, we live in a beach town. I mean, I could have a lot more and have a yacht, but then it'd be a pain in the neck.
I don't know. You sound like a wealthy man to me.
That's it. Standards of what wealth is, we all have different standards. Yeah.
That we do. It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Gratitude.
I think that's our number one answer. It's really that simple.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not
gratitude for what you have. Not easy.
And that comes,
all these things take practice.
That comes down to silencing the voices in our head that aren't serving us, right?
That's right. I was like, oh gosh, if I could only have that BMW.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
How to be less judgmental.
Here, I thought you were the expert at that.
Well, later in life, yeah.
Yes.
Not when I was 20.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Because it feeds into jealousy, and they have what I don't have, and your judgment or whatever it is. Let people be, do your thing and let people be. And you can't control it or them or anything else. Yeah.
That is true. If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Learn AI.
Learn AI. In today's world, right? That's kind of what it is.
It ain't going away.
It is not going away. And I don't know how many people realize this, but AI is great for you to have those internal conversations with about your judgments and the way you look at things, and ask it to challenge you. And this way you don't have to tell anyone else. It takes a little less courage to tell this chatbot, what's going on.
To tell it.
There you go.
Yeah. I say that. And then also I think to this notion of self-awareness, just taking the time to be a little more self-aware, so you aren't living life on autopilot, and you have more choices that way. Oh, I don't have to do that. I can do this.
And that is very true. If people would like to get the book, learning more about you, how do they go about doing that? So the book is online at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all that jazz. And then, so buy the book or your favorite bookstore. It's good for me. It's good for the local bookstore. My website is chuckwisner.com. And there you can download a free PDF of the introduction to the book. And you can also scroll down and write me a note or try to connect with me via email. I have a minor presence on Instagram and LinkedIn, Chuck_Wisner. So that's sort of me out in the world. And I'm writing a lot of articles these days. So usually when I write an article, I'll put it into LinkedIn or Instagram so people can access articles that I'm writing. Awesome. And we'll put that all in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Conversations aren't just about words. They're about the emotions we bury, the stories we cling to, and the truth we're too often too busy to hear. If there's one thing to take away from today's episode, it's this. Peace doesn't come from having the right answers. It comes from asking better questions and being present enough to really listen. Whether you're leading a team, raising a family, or just trying to make sense of your next chapter, your conversations are creating your reality. So slow down, get curious, and speak from a place of intention, not fear. And if today's episode gave you a thought or it helped you see something different, then take a moment and share it with someone in your life who's ready for deeper conversations too. That's how we grow together. Thanks for sharing. Have an abundant week.